What I would say to anybody who's communicating on any level is you need to have an opening. You need to have a middle, right?
Yeah.
But what most people don't work on is the close.
Yeah.
Most people don't, they spend so much time preparing the content in the middle and how they're going to open that they don't give time to how am I going to shut this down.
This is the Uncommon Success Podcast, where we explore topics about success and dive into the stories of leaders who found success along the way.
And success isn't easy. It takes some grit, a little bit of luck, and a whole lot of patience.
We know that success comes in many shapes and sizes, and we're exploring them all.
So get ready for a journey through the remarkable stories of individuals who have faced challenges head on and learned many lessons along the way.
From business moguls to artists, educators to industry leaders, entrepreneurs to athletes. If it's an uncommon success story, we'll cover it.
The Uncommon Success Podcast. Real stories, real people, real success.
This episode is brought to you by B-Lane Apparel. Attention small business owners and nonprofits. Are you looking for great apparel that will set your organization apart from everyone else? Then you need to use B-Lane Apparel. From eye-catching hats to shirts that redefine comfort, they've got it all covered. Quality materials, quality water-based inks, quality service. Because you deserve nothing but the best. Visit belane.com now and let your imagination run wild. That's BEALANE.com. Don't just wear apparel, wear quality. Get your custom apparel that you need today for any activity or event at belane.com. So check them out, B-Lane Apparel.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Uncommon Success Podcast.
Yes, hello and welcome to our community. Glad that you are tuning in. I'm your host, Andy Coats, and I'm joined by my niece, Mackenzie Coats, who's back with us, filling in for Brinly once again. We don't know if Brinley's ever coming back, and Mackenzie said, hey, if she doesn't come back, I'll be happy to help out whenever I can. So I think Brinley's supposed to be back for episode 10, but who really knows?
Hey,
And
I'm free
yeah,
next Sunday. So
there you go.
Just kidding, that's a lie. I'm actually not free
You're
next
not-
Sunday.
you're not
But
free.
the next I'm free.
The next
next
Sunday,
one?
if
Yeah.
she doesn't show up
Yeah.
or lets me know she's not coming, I never know if it's going to be the day of. But either way,
I'll be here.
we're glad that you're here today, though. So glad to have you. So welcome back. And I want to tell you, I'm real excited. You know, we talk about success on this podcast a lot. I'm real proud of you. This weekend, you spent some time accomplishing a big task. So tell us, what'd you do this weekend?
This weekend I ran the Little Rock 10K, and I finished it in around an hour, which I was
Okay.
really proud because I've not been running like I should be.
Yeah.
And I ran it after being sick, and I did it, and I finished it
Nice.
in like my best time running miles ever,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
That's good. I mean, to run over 6 miles in under an hour, that's right at an hour, pretty impressive. Got you a nice medal because of it.
I did.
Yeah. First 10K, right? You've done
First
a couple
10K.
of 5Ks, but
Mhm,
first
first
10K.
10K.
In preparation for a half marathon this summer.
Yep, in June 2nd, I believe.
Yeah. So a little something you don't know as our audience, but Mackenzie, her dad and I, we've done quite a few races together over the years. And several years ago, we were doing a turkey trot together. And her mom said to me, Andy, I need you to get video of Mackenzie running this race. And I did not do my job of getting video. So on the way home, we pulled over at different spots along the way. And I said, get out of the car and just act like you're running in a race, Mackenzie. And that was the last race she ran.
We did do that.
Yeah, that
We did do
was about 10 years ago. So here she is back at running again. At least I think so. She may have just taken a picture on the side of the road with that medal. Who really knows? But we also want to, we're excited today. We want to introduce our guest who's joining us on this podcast. He did not run a race this weekend that I know of.
No, I didn't have a spare 10 hours to run a 10K this weekend. So, because that's about how long it would have taken me with the stops that I would have needed to
1
make.
hour per K. Right?
Yeah. Snacks, water, things like that.
Well, if you need anyone to pretend like you ran the race, be happy to help you out, man. I'm a professional fake race photographer.
Hey, listen, I'm going to sign up next week for a few races.
Yeah.
Yeah, get my profile up a little bit.
Sign up for the races. I'll take the pictures. You never have to run the race.
I mean, at this rate, we could do all kinds of things. I mean, not just run races. We could climb mountains. I mean, there are all kinds of things we could do next weekend.
Just taking pictures
Yeah.
and pretending that we...
Absolutely.
Hey, with AI now...
That we
could
did
probably,
it. That's right.
AI,
That's
put
right.
a picture of me on top of Everest this weekend.
We're glad you're on the show today. We're so excited to hear your story and pick your brain.
Yeah, going to pick his brain a little bit. We're going to have a great discussion about communication here in just a little bit. But first things first, Mackenzie, why don't you tell us a little bit more about our guest today?
Yes, I'd love to. Today, we are thrilled to spotlight Brandon Mitchell. With a passion for ministry and a sharp instinct for real estate investment, Brandon has spent the last 3 decades developing a multifaceted career path that reflects his unwavering commitment to excellence and service. As a dedicated leader in ministry for over 30 years, he is known for inspiring and mentoring students and young adults. Alongside his ministry endeavors, he's excelled in real estate investment for 20 years, revitalizing communities with strategic projects. Brandon's integrity, compassion, and entrepreneurial drive shine through, making him a trusted leader within our community. As an effective communicator that is relevant across many generations, Brandon's unique mix of humor, wisdom, compassion, and motivation always leaves audiences of all ages wanting more. Although Brandon has found much financial and personal success over the past 3 decades, he still remains dedicated to make a positive impact, one sermon, one real estate investment, one life transformed at a time.
I did all that?
Well, that's what you sent into it, so I'm guessing that's all true.
Yeah, no, I think it was all true. I think it was all true.
Man, I'm honored to have you on here. Brandon and I, we spent several years together traveling, doing camps, and we were on church staff together many years ago.
Yes.
And as I was thinking about this, I realized that's been 20 years ago that we did camps and we're on staff together at a church.
Wow.
And I was like, man, that's 2 decades
Yes.
of my life that has happened since. And it seems like just yesterday, and on some points and other points, it seems like forever ago. And Brandon, for me, was one of the first role models I had in public speaking. So even as we looked at, hey, we wanted to discuss this topic of communication, for me, I looked up to you a lot in my I was 19, I think, when we first met, doing camps. You were preaching the camps. I was just even coming on board, doing whatever they let me do for camps, and just watching you communicate really was an inspiration for me, because you were a young communicator then.
Yes.
And just watching as you were delivering and engaging the audience and telling stories was just very inspiring to me as a young aspiring communicator. So I'm glad to have you, man, as we talk about communication today. I'm excited and honored that you'd be on the podcast with us.
I'm glad that people still let me communicate.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I'm glad I made it this far.
Yeah.
So you look back at those 20 years like, man, look at all this life. And I'm like, man, I actually got to keep doing it for 20 years. So
Yeah.
that's pretty incredible. No, I'm excited to be here. I'm thankful. I'm excited about today.
Well, I wasn't even born yet, and it sounds like y'all had done a whole lot, and I would love to hear more about it in your story and your family and just all your successes.
Wonderful. Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, tell us about it. Tell us about your family, your story a little bit. Give us a little background here.
Yeah, so I am a single father of one. I actually, and I'll share this on here, I don't mind. I actually lost my wife a year and 3 months ago. And so I now have a 9-year-old son that I'm learning how to raise as a single dad. And that's a world that I never expected to see myself in or understand, but have been surrounded by amazing community, amazing family, amazing mentors, and just thankful really for every day that I have to go out and continue to do the things that I believe are a part of who I am, which is communicating, encouraging, and developing people. So I currently am serving on a teaching team for LWC. And so I meet together with a group of guys who are all communicators by their own right, all have about 20 years or more of experience, and we collectively work together to put together a weekly message on our topic of discussion each week. And so I'm honored to be able to have the opportunity to do that as well. And so besides that, obviously, we talked a little bit about real estate. I'm in real estate and have been invested in real estate for the last 20 plus years of my life. My wife and I actually owned a property management company that managed over 700 single family homes.
Okay.
So I spent other people's money and learned from their mistakes.
There you go.
And then put together our own system based on that to begin investing in real estate ourselves. And now am reaping the benefits of those investments that have been made.
Yeah, and the lessons learned through that process. And
Absolutely, yes. And then besides that, we're in some commercial real estate as well. We own an RV park in Hot Springs with some partners, which is one of our favorite investments. And then just 2 blocks from here, we own King's Antiques and more as well.
Nice.
And it's all real estate.
Yeah.
Even the antique market is just about renting booth space out for people to be able to put their stuff.
Yeah.
So-
Got your hands on all kinds of stuff. And
Yeah.
at the same time, I know from relationship with you that this is a new season for you where you're kind of scaling back, really focusing in on family and
100%.
and just prime years for your son, and so trying
Yes.
to pour into him. And
Yeah, I think you redefine your priorities in times like this, right?
Yeah.
And what was important to me maybe 2 years ago is less important to me now. And the things that wasn't that they weren't important, they're vitally important to me now. And so at the end of the day right now, everybody defines success in different ways. Some define it money. I define it time.
Yeah.
So if I can control my time and I have the time to do the things I want with the people that I want when I want, for me, that's success.
Thank you for sharing your story. Well, I'd like to transition us to some questions. This is episode 9, Being a Better Communicator. And today we're going to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, today I thought it would be great for us as we were just discussing this topic. Thought it'd be a great time for us to spend some time talking through these questions. I have over 20 years of experience as a communicator. Myself, Brandon, has 30 years now.
Thank you for pointing that
out. Yeah, so I have 20, but you have 30. 3 decades worth
Yeah.
of experience. So I thought it'd be great for us to spend some time just in discussion and ask Mackenzie if she wouldn't mind just moderating these questions for us. So she's going to lead out, throw some questions our way, and we'll spend some time just discussing that. And feel free to shut us off whenever you feel like we've talked too long on them.
Yeah,
All right?
2 communicators.
All
so
right.
definitely have to shut it
That's
off at some
a
point.
problem. So kick us off with your first question here.
So my first question is, what are some easy ways to improve communication skills in everyday life?
You got to talk to people.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to force yourself into conversation, I think. We're so used now to communicating through short form, right? Text or something like that. But you actually physically have to make yourself have conversation with other people.
I had someone tell me one time, you've got to get really good at talking to lots and lots of people.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of just having those personal conversations and I think even smaller groups, spending time in conversation, because it's really easy to put headphones in, just avoid people. I get myself in trouble sometimes in everyday life where I'll just start having conversations with folks. And most people don't do that anymore. So I think having everyday conversation with folks about all kinds of random topics, I would say is probably one of the
And
easier
people you
ways.
don't know.
Yeah.
Like if you really want to, develop, then talk to people that aren't like you. Talk to people that don't think like you or do what you do. Ask people. And really, I think, if I were just to give you a point on how to do that is ask people to talk about themselves. Because everybody likes to talk about themselves.
And they're an expert on themselves.
That's right.
Yeah.
So just even asking people, hey, how are you today? And it kind of throw people off,
Yeah.
especially in the grocery store. That'll really mess them up. They don't even know how to answer sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
Going off of what you just said about like people, like how do you think that like body language affects communication and can convey messages?
well, you're a woman, so you probably understand that better than we do.
Yeah.
But it's I think it's key to communication. I think if you're closed off, arms crossed, you're projecting something that says I'm not really interested in the information you're giving me. So keeping your area open, whatever this is,
Right.
and then if it's someone that you're comfortable with, even I want to be careful about this word, but even touch,
Yeah.
hand on the shoulder, something says I'm listening to what you're saying.
Yeah, eye contact, I think, is a big factor of that too. That if you're asking me a question, I want to engage in the conversation. So if I'm closed off, it's a closing off of the conversation. People naturally, if you cross those arms, they naturally pull back.
Yeah.
So, body language definitely makes a big difference. Both of us, I think, from being a communicator, we're on the platform quite a bit in
Yes.
our communication. So right now we're behind mics and cameras and people are hearing our voice right now, but primarily we're up on the stage and people are trying to engage. And both what we do is we preach quite a bit. That's our primary form of communicating. And so you got 30 to 40 minutes of time that you're going to spend. And if you just stand there,
Yeah,
you can lose an
you
audience.
can count the people that are sleeping.
Yeah. Yep. They'll tell you in their body language as the heads start to nod and eyes start to close that you've lost them. So not only are you vocally having to communicate, but if you're not bringing them in with your body language too, it makes a big difference. Or if you're just closed off and you're talking, you don't want to get too much because then that can push people away too.
Yeah, I was going to say understanding how to make those changes depending on if you're on stage or if you're in a smaller setting, right? So if you're on stage, everything's big. We want to be big. Our voice is big. Our movements are big. Everything's exaggerated a little bit. Part of that is just about keeping the audience engaged. But if I'm in a close setting like this, I don't want to be big, right? Because I'm pushing you out. Like I want to scale back. And so understanding where you are and who you're talking to, I think is key to that as well.
Yeah, and I've heard someone say it too. If you want open conversation with somebody especially if you're communicating in a speech or a sermon or whatever, you're not getting direct feedback. You're only getting body language feedback. So if you want open dialogue, then your body language has to communicate with their body language. Yeah. So my voice, I'm not going to get verbal, response
Depends
back.
on the church.
Yeah, that's true.
I got some this morning. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean,
they were with me.
That is true. You depending on the church you're in, you may get not just a single word affirmation. You may get full.
You might
paragraph.
get a sentence. Yeah. You go and tell him again, Pastor, because this man over here, he wasn't listening, and he be going through some stuff.
My husband fell asleep while you were saying that. Say that one more time.
Say it one more time. So you appreciate those people, though. You know they're with you, right? Yeah.
But for the most part, it's body language. So how I communicate with my body language will what I reciprocate back. So
and I think it's important to understand, especially if you're new at communication. Most people are nervous and uncomfortable. And when you're nervous and uncomfortable, you tend to project that through your body language, right? And so some of that is just developing to the point where you lose that nervousness so that you can be more of what I say yourself when you're communicating. People are so afraid of doing it wrong that they do it wrong. Mm-hmm. Like somebody needs to put that somewhere, like put that on a shirt. Don't be so afraid to do it wrong that you do it wrong. But that's really what happens. You get so in your mind that you just kind of lose the essence of what you're supposed to be doing. So
in communication, there's speaking and there's listening. Both are important in communication. Can you share importance in active listening? Maybe some tips or advice?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say this one's actually hard for me because I'm not so much the one-on-one conversation guy. If I'm just honest, I'm more of the more people I'm talking to, the more comfortable I am. Put me in front of 10,000 people, and I'm just like, this is where I live, right? You put me in a room with one person, and I'm a little freaked out. I'm going to be honest. And so what I had to learn is as a communicator, especially when I'm having a conversation with someone, is I'm always thinking about the next thing I'm going to say. Yeah. So as they're talking, I'm working on my response. And when you do that, you kind of lose track of what they're talking about. And so what I have to do is make myself listen to what they're saying, and then my response oftentimes needs to be a question in relation to what they just said. Yep. So if they're telling me about whatever, their day, and there's a key element in that day that seems to have been difficult or maybe really good, then my response should be, hey, tell me more about that, right? Rather than me giving them a response or an answer to what I think about their day. So for me, the key to this, to being a better listener, is just instead of focusing on what I'm going to say next, focus on what more information can I get from them, from the story that they want me to hear.
Yeah, and most people in conversation, their mind starts to shift how they would answer that question.
100%.
If you ask somebody, hey, tell me, how would you do this? You're waiting for their response, but they're just thinking, do I agree with that? What would I do here? And they oftentimes miss it. So I think the active part is intentionally trying to figure out, how can I affirm what they're saying, and like by not just saying yeah, but in my response to what they said, I'm now affirming it with a direct response to what was said. So if you're like, how was your day? It was, I struggled a little bit. Well, if you're not paying attention, you'll be like, yeah, that's great.
That's wonderful.
But instead, we'll tell what did happen. Like Brandon said, asking more questions specific to it. I think definitely.
Yeah, why did you struggle? And I want to add a word to that. You said, speaking and listening, or you might have said communicating, speaking. So you said communicating and listening. I think there are three words. I think there are speakers, there are communicators, and there are listeners. Yeah. And there's a difference between speaking and communicating. Speaking is I've got something to say, and I'm going to say it. And I'm not going to change the way I say it. I'm not going to adapt the way I say it. I'm going to say it, right? A communicator says, hey, I've got something I want to say, but it's important to me that it resonates with you. It's not just that I need to get it out. I want to get it out, and I want it to actually be impactful in your life. I mean a lot of people who are great speakers. they're not great communicators.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is they've got a topic or a discussion or something that they're going to share, and they share it the same way every time, no matter where they are or who they're with. That's because they're a speaker. A communicator is audience oriented. How do I say this in a way where Mackenzie appreciates it, where Mackenzie takes it and she continues to think about it and, processes it and gets affirmation from it. So I think there's 3 parts. And I think sometimes we say speaker and we just assume everybody's a speaker, but everybody's not. I'm not a great speaker. I'm not great at just creating a set outline and just going, no, this is the way I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it this way every time. For me, I have to read the room.
Yeah.
I recently went and did an event at a place where I knew nobody. And the first night fell flat. Not because the information that I gave was wrong, but I didn't know the audience well enough to really understand how to best communicate it to it. So the next night I changed the whole dynamic of how it was communicated because it was important to me not that I said it, but they hear it.
Right.
Going off of how do you noticed that you needed to change how you speak it? Like, what are some advice to change, communicating with different people to get your point or whatever you want across so that everyone can understand what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I think it goes to your listening point on that sometimes when you're communicating to the audience, you may not be hearing verbally what they're saying, but you have to listen based on, we know as communicators, and if you ever get out there and you're trying to speak to an audience of any size, you can feel if it's being received or not.
100%.
And if you feel the tension, then what you have to do is be able to, on the spot, make that shift.
Yes.
It helps the more seasoned you are in it because you fall enough times and realize that bombed or that did not connect, that you learn how to adjust those things. But I would say the first thing is in the spot, if it's not connecting, if it's not working, you need to move on.
Yeah.
Don't keep staying at it because you'll lose the rest of whatever your content is.
Yeah.
Because you stayed in that moment. But then evaluate afterwards. Go back and say, okay, this didn't work with this audience, and I need to ask myself questions. Why?
And then for me, I think one of the things that I'm constantly having to learn how to do is slow down. Slow down the information. I talk fast.
Me too. I struggle with that.
I don't struggle with it. I'm good at it. I think you're good at it as well, Mackenzie. I don't think you struggle with it at all. I think you're good at talking fast. But sometimes it's important. And so probably those times became even more evident. I remember being in Korea. I had the opportunity to go to Korea to communicate. And so I remember being in South Korea and going into what we call ESL, English Second Language Schools, and speaking to hundreds of students who are primarily Korean, right, who are learning English. And so I remember get up and I'm just doing what I do. I'm just putting the information out. I'm being big. I'm being, everything I can be to engage the audience. And they're just talking. Like they are looking at each other. They're not even looking at me. They're having full-on conversations. And so I remember getting off the stage the first day and going, well, that was a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah.
And a teacher came up to me later and said, I think I need to fill you in. So you probably noticed that the students were talking while you were talking. That wasn't to be disrespectful. They were helping each other translate what you were saying because you're speaking so fast. So the ones who understood English a little better were actually interpreting your message to the ones who didn't speak as well. Yeah. And so it was a reminder to me sometimes, even with people who do speak my language, I need to slow down a little bit.
Yeah, because even if they can understand you, like the words you're saying, sometimes the processing speed of what you say, because especially in the platforms we're trying to communicate information that we want it to connect and transformational to change your life. So if you say something and someone they just soak that in, they're like, wow, that hits home. If you just speed right past that, well, they drop that moment of transformation potential, and they're just going to try to keep listening. Sometimes it's slowing it down.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to pause. Especially in public speaking. I know sometimes maybe in a small one-on-one conversation it can even seem weird, but even in those moments, don't be afraid to pause. Don't be afraid to take a breath, give them a moment to consider what you've said, and then build on it.
Yeah, silence up front feels very awkward to a communicator. When you're first learning to speak in audiences of any size, small or large, that silence feels like it's forever.
Yes.
And
it's half a second feels like 2 minutes.
One of my first times I was doing some counseling, my wife and I were in Colorado, and we were doing a counseling session, and this family's going through a lot. Just had a big traumatic event that took place in their family, and they ask a question, and I start just trying to provide some solutions to them. And I'd ask them a question, no response. I'd ask another question, no response. And my wife leaned over and just put her hand on my kneecap, and I look at her, and she's like, and I could read what she was saying, just stop talking. Let the silence happen. And that same thing, I think about it all the time with communicating.
Yes.
Like, I just let there be some silence here, and that's okay.
100%.
It feels
100%.
like it's, like you said, forever.
Yes.
But
And it's one of those things that you have to do enough times to get to a place where you're comfortable with it, where you can just pause. I go back and listen a lot of times when I communicate. I'll go back and do playback and listen, critique myself, see what I could do better, what I could have changed. And in my mind, I'll remember where those pauses are. Mm-hmm. And I'll think, man, that was just the longest pause ever. And then I listen to it, and it is literally like a second and a half. And
Yeah.
I'm talking again, and I'm like, yeah, I could work on that.
as a listener, it felt normal for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh, they don't even know. They're like,
Right.
You had a long pause? Like, yeah, second and a half for me. That's a long pause.
Remember that long pause? No, I don't.
Don't remember.
So our generation, like my generation, relies a lot on phones. How do y'all feel like that hurts and helps with communication?
Yeah, so our generation's starting to get pretty bad at it too. The difference is we don't do as well as your generation does at being able to multitask, where you can be on the phone and other things.
Drive,
Yeah.
for one.
Our generation, they get on that phone, they lock in, they forget the rest of the world
Yeah,
exists.
run up on the sidewalk.
Yeah. I think from a con standpoint, it does kill personal interaction.
Absolutely.
You know, it's hard to communicate over a text message
Yeah.
what you can in person.
Yeah,
And it's very often that people will, it's easier because you can type it out and you got documented evidence of it, and you can retrace your steps. You make it say exactly what you want it to say. But that can land worse even than if you fumble your way through it in-person conversation.
100%. I agree.
So I think that's a con to it.
90% I feel like what I text is misread.
Yeah.
Like I have a
Yeah.
problem where I didn't have a problem.
Yep.
And so I don't enjoy communicating. I don't mind, if you ask me, hey, what time do you want to meet for lunch? I mean, we can have that conversation by text.
Right.
But if you're going to ask me, hey, what's your thoughts on, whatever this topic is, I don't want to have that over text. And
Yeah.
two, I think there's a couple of things in your generation. One, I think there's a lot of noise. Mm-hmm. And I think it makes it very difficult to hear the things that are important because you hear so many things, right? And then two, I think there's a lot of, I think it lacks authenticity. I think there's a perception that's not reality. And so people are communicating a lifestyle and an idea that doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
We do it too in our generation, just not through social media or we do it by buying a truck we can't afford, living in a house we can't afford, sort of
Boat
create
you
this,
can't afford.
yeah, create this perception that no, we're killing it, and the reality is we're $400,000 in debt, and don't know how we're going to pay our bills, right? So it's happened for a long time. Now it just happens virtually, whereas we used to have. Now you can fake it, though. Again, with
Right.
AI, right? We can just create, like, look at my new boat. You don't
Yeah.
know if I got a boat or not. This could be my buddy's boat that I just came and took a picture of. So I think in that sense, I think there's just so much that's not real that's being communicated, and I think it makes it difficult for people to not want to compare themselves to that, and which really doesn't get into communication, but I feel like in a sense that's what it does, though. It breaks that. It breaks communication.
Yeah, our generation, it is keeping up with the Joneses, where now it's keeping up with the influencers.
Yes.
I'm trying to look good compared to my neighbor, and now it's trying to look good compared to, those who are on social media. And that same, what it does, from a communication standpoint, I'm communicating out to people something I'm not.
That's right.
Or they're not getting the full, idea of who I really am, even if I'm genuine with what I'm saying. I can tweet something out, I can post something on Instagram and mean it fully, but if you don't have that personal interaction, no one ever really knows you. I think that's where communication has what it hurts is not having interpersonal communication with people hurts truly knowing somebody.
I feel like it creates a false perception of
Yeah.
someone. And like I'm going to add like communication between our different generations. Like if someone were to send me a text and say, okay, with a period at the end, I'm going to assume they're mad at me. And I'm going to assume I did something wrong. When in reality, that's just them like using proper punctuation.
Right.
But like, I feel like my generation takes punctuation as like a period is not a good thing. So it's like for us, if you say okay period, that means I did something wrong. I'm in trouble. You're mad at me. Whereas it doesn't actually have to mean that.
Mackenzie just explained why I create problems. Because apparently I've been using periods at the end of my
Same here.
statements. And thank you, Mackenzie, for this moment, because
Yeah.
I think you may have just saved me all kinds of relational issues now, because I can take that off. I mean, I had no idea.
Even worse, I put exclamation marks at the end of
All
It
the
doesn't
time.
mean anything though. Like an exclamation part to me, it's like you're excited. Like but like a period has a negative connotation
Wow.
Yeah.
in our generation.
Okay.
Like it does not mean something good. But exclamation points, question marks, like they can get into it, but a period does not have a good connotation.
You know, this is so interesting because I think generationally, there's always gaps in communication between generations.
Yes.
And it's not, oftentimes, it's smaller than whatever the incident actually is. But when you're dealing with technology, you can't have the conversation to clarify that.
That's right.
So if I sent you a message and you said, hey, are you coming to the, is it okay if I come to the family dinner this weekend? And I'm like, sure, period.
You are really
Like-
mad and you don't want me to be there. That's what that means.
Right. But if we were having a personal conversation and I said, sure, yeah, like you wouldn't take anything of it.
Understanding that if we were to transcribe that, there would be a period behind it.
Right. But just the difference of generation, where if it's in person, you don't feel that as there's not much confusion. So I think where technology hurts is that it creates confusion. Where I think it helps with communication is if I need a 1 second response, and I know certain people that if I call, a 1 second response will take me 20 minutes to get the response. What time are we meeting? 6 o'clock. If I make that phone call, how are the kids?
Yeah.
So where it helps, I think, from technology standpoint is also I can get the short response. What time's the meeting? 6 o'clock.
And
Done.
if you can get that message, going into the technology, it opens the door for you to get your message to more people faster.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not even just communicating maybe to just Mackenzie what time, family dinner is, but you can communicate to the whole family,
Yeah.
right? With boom, 6 o'clock, everybody knows when to be there. Same with social media. I can take a message, I can take something that's important to me and I can put that out for people. The hard part is I got to get through the noise,
Yeah.
right? I got to get through everything else for people to be able to see it or relate to it. But there is a benefit to being able to communicate to the masses so quickly.
Yeah.
So with that, both of y'all are very experienced with public speaking. What would be your advice to like grow and develop your public speaking ability?
Yeah. Do it.
Yeah. Mine
Yeah.
starts with, do all the things nobody else wants to do. Mm-hmm. Like people ask me, well, how did you get started? Well, I did all the things nobody else wanted to do.
Yep.
I said yes when everybody else said no.
Taking opportunities.
Yes.
Yeah, both Brandon and I, our stories are similar. We cut our teeth in public speaking by losing money to go do things. Like
Paying money sometimes.
Yeah.
It
costs you to go speak at an event for a weekend. Well, it may take you $100 in gas to get to this place, and they're going to pay you. Sometimes you don't even know if you're getting paid or not. And if you did, it may be like $50, $60. You're like, this cost me $40 to come to this thing, but I gained the experience of it.
Yes.
Nowadays, the platforms you can have out there, you don't have to do what we had to do. But getting in front of a camera or whatever it might be, taking opportunities and just giving it a shot. Start in small dosage. Don't get up there and feel like you have to speak in front of 10,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, both of us have probably found it's easier to prepare for 10,000 than it is for a group of 10.
Absolutely.
Because most of the time you're 100 feet away from, you don't even see the people in
Yeah.
the larger venues. But
I you talk about that, and it's funny because I don't know if this generation will know what it was like. And I think the generation before us would say the same thing.
Right.
Right? I mean, we listened
Yeah.
to the guys who cut their teeth in the same venue, same genre, And if you hear their stories, and I'm like, man, that $100 wasn't that bad,
Right. Yeah, I got paid.
Yeah,
something.
I got paid. But I remember a time where I got this phone call from a guy who said, hey man, we've got this event that's happening this weekend. We'd love to have you come down. There was a band, obviously, that was going to be there. I knew the band very well. He said, man, I got your name from the band. I know you know those guys. It's just kind of like a one night thing. Just come speak. I was like, yeah, man, I'm in. He's like, look, man, I don't have much in the budget, but I'm going to take care of you. He said, I know you like Fiji water at this period in my life. I still today like Fiji water.
Yeah.
Just if they want to sponsor this podcast, Fiji water.
Yeah, feel free to send us money.
money. And Fiji water and Snickers was my like go-to snack, right? And he's like, man, I'll get you Fiji, bottle of Fiji water and a Snickers. And of course, to me, like he's being humorous. He's being funny. And so I drove, like 7 hours and spoke at this event. No hotel room, put me in some family's house, spare bedroom that I'd never met before. You just sleep in there, you'll be all right. And then the next day, as I was leaving, he said, man, meet me up here at the gas station. I met him at the gas station, and he handed me a bottle of Fiji water and a Snickers, and he topped off my tank and sent me on my way.
Wow.
And I thought, that didn't just happen, but it did.
Yeah.
And I could walk away from that moment and go, I just got robbed.
Yeah.
Or I could use that moment as a learning opportunity to go, you know what? I had a chance to develop the gift and the skill that I have and to communicate. And right, what we talk about, especially what we talk about, is bigger than us anyway at the end of the day, right? So we use the term sowing seed. So, I can say that I sowed seed for future opportunity. But every opportunity I've had in communication came from doing the things nobody else wanted to do.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I both did preteen camps. We spoke at preteen camps. If you just really want to become a great communicator, because they will let you know.
Yeah.
Quick, within the first 3 minutes, if rather or not you're doing what they need you to do, right?
Yeah.
But speaking at a preteen camp caused my phone to ring, which sent me to a large church in Tyler, Texas, which opened the door for young adult ministry, which then in turn turned into a phone call where I end up in Thailand, which turned into a phone call where I end up in South Korea. So it's just interesting how those small things that I did that honestly when I was doing them I probably wasn't really excited about it.
Yeah.
But just knew that that's where I was in my craft and my ability at the time and how that opened doors of opportunity.
Yeah.
So I would say if you want to communicate, then communicate. Take every opportunity to communicate that comes.
Sorry.
I'll just add to that practice and preparation too. Little things that you can't control who's going to ask you to come and speak somewhere. You can't control the opportunities you're going to get for the most part. You can work hard at it, but if you practice and prepare, then in those moments when the opportunity does come,
be ready.
You're ready.
Be ready. Like have something.
Yep. And in the meantime, the places you do go leave great stories and
yes,
they help
absolutely.
you for future. Yeah,
absolutely. And then people feel sorry for you when you tell them that story, and then maybe they take care of you a little bit better
that's right.
when you come.
You get 2 Fiji waters.
Yeah, they're like, oh man, you already went and got Fiji water and a Snickers. Like we need to do something for him.
And with communication comes difficult topics and things to say. How can you be firm without being mean or rude to where it changes the way someone perceives your character?
Yeah, I mean, so hard topics. So in communicating, so like say this is a leadership podcast. So those who are listening, maybe for them they're business owners and they're trying to communicate something that's difficult to say. I think you can say hard things in ways that don't just make you a jerk.
Yeah.
It takes a lot more finesse, and I think you've got to go into it prepared. But ultimately, I'd say if you got something hard to say, your focus ought to be, how can I say this with some grace in it?
Yeah. I use this as an illustration. I've used it before, but it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So Mackenzie, I could say to you, girl, I'm going to be honest. Your face could make time stand still. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay? That's one way to say it. I can say the same thing. Mackenzie, your face could stop a clock. Okay? I said the same thing. One had a little different connotation than the other, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's just being intentional with your wording when you're having those hard conversations, and don't avoid them. know that they're going to happen. One of the guys that has influenced us in our life both, but he used to be famous for this saying, what you don't confront will eventually confront you.
Yeah.
And I'd rather be on the front side of the conversation than the back side of the conversation any day.
Yeah.
So if you can just be intentional with that conversation, be gentle, be kind, and be honest. I think sometimes we get into a difficult conversation and we're so afraid to say the honest thing that we say all these other things and it just gets muddy.
Yeah.
Where if you can just say what needs to be said and, and say it with kindness and close it out with, hey, man, I just want you to know I still care about you as a person and, but this is a conversation we had to have.
One of the things in my early days of doing ministry and traveling, watching how you handled difficult things to say to people. We had some different incidents that may pop up here and there with staff, and somehow I feel like you always got hey, could you go talk to them about it? It seemed like I saw that happen for you a lot, was, hey, why don't you go talk to them? And I'd watch how you'd handle it, and I was impressed by it. It usually started with, you didn't try to drive home your point to somebody. It was always a question. Help me understand with this situation. And I think a few moments of just, you may not remember some of those things, but like they were big to me because I watched as you handled it where I thought, man, they are about to get lit up here. And it was a question. It wasn't, hey, let me tell you off, but a question. So I think if you approach difficult things, not trying to make a point, but trying to resolve an issue.
Yeah.
And wanting both people to come out on the other side of this not torn down. Because oftentimes we get in difficult things and it's easy for me to, I'm gonna drop the hammer on this, and it may require
sometimes
firmness.
you do have to drop the hammer. Right?
Yeah.
If you've had the conversation multiple times, sometimes the
Yeah.
only thing left to do is drop the hammer.
Yeah,
But you shouldn't start there.
yeah,
We don't start with a hammer.
and you can still drop a hammer without compromising your character.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because if I drop the hammer and I walk away looking like a terrible human being, I probably didn't drop the hammer correctly.
So, with Eli, this is, again, my son's 9, and when he was young, and this is a communication piece, but we decided very early on that we weren't just going to constantly say no, right? Not that we're not going to say no, we're just not going to say it that way.
Yeah.
Because if all you ever hear is no, like that doesn't really communicate what we want to communicate.
Yeah.
So oftentimes it would be more like, hey, we don't do that. Not you don't do it, we, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things even in communication that, especially in the genre we're in, is oftentimes we use the words we, us, not you, right? So we kind of bring ourselves into the situation. Hey, we don't do that. We do this. And I think sometimes just leading into those hard things of saying, hey, I'm not trying to isolate you. I think that's a good word to say. I'm not trying to isolate you. I'm not trying to make a spectacle out of you. I want you to know as a corporation, we don't do this.
Yeah.
As an entity, we don't do this. As individuals, we don't do this. Not who we are. Because one of the greatest things you have as a communicator is to be able to influence people's identity and character. And you do that through your words. And so if we use our words properly, then we should build up and not tear down.
Absolutely. And y'all have both mentioned that y'all would much rather speak on a larger platform, whereas most people wouldn't. And y'all don't like necessarily the small conversation. So what's something?
I like probably more than he does.
You like the smaller ones better?
I like the small.
If you had to give something, getting better at communicating more one-on-one compared to speaking out on a platform, what would your advice be for the one-on-one conversations?
So some of it has to do with how you're wired. I'm wired that I enjoy one-on-one type of small talk moments. It gets me in trouble because we're trying to leave church or leave a party or leave something, and I haven't talked to everybody one-on-one yet, and so my wife is always like, okay, it's time for us to go. So some of it's just my nature. So for me, I'm drawn to it. So it's for me, offering advice maybe a little, I would say you practice it, get really good at just asking questions, and then you never have to be the one talking. You're just the one asking, and you let other people talk.
Yes.
Which is a lot of what I do anyway by nature in those moments. But I don't know, from you, someone who it isn't your favorite thing, what would you say is something that avoid them?
So, interestingly enough, my wife, she was the small talk. She was the one-on-one. She was the sit down and have a cup of coffee. and let's talk about life. And one of the things I've learned, even after her passing, is how many people's lives she impacted and influenced through these moments. A lot of people would say, man, you've communicated to so many, you've touched so many lives. And I'm like, man, I don't know, even communicating to the masses, if I've touched the number of lives in the way that my wife touched lives by just sitting down and having a cup of coffee with people. I communicated over a microphone. She communicated over caffeine, right? And she was so good at it. True about me, having a one-on-one conversation. Now, I have, so we'll call it the inner circle, right? Those are the people that are closest to me, that know me, that I don't feel like I have to present in a specific way, right? I don't feel like I have to project something. I can just be me. Those people, I can have one-on-one conversations. But like just random individuals, who just want to come up and talk, they drain the life out of me. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It sounds horrible, right? But I can have that one-on-one conversation and leave that moment and just feel exhausted. I can get up on a platform and talk to 1,000 people and walk away and feel energized and be like, hey, let's go to Waffle House and let's go, and just so excited. So much so that when I learned this about me, I actually began to put things in place to protect me. So the exact opposite of what you're asking us to do is what I did. So I had what I call the go-to guy. And so when someone would corner me and begin to draw me into deep conversation after a moment or at an event or something, I had a look that I would give and they would know, rescue Brandon. And they had that gift. They had that gift of, they wanted to have that conversation, right? And so I gave them opportunity to operate within their gifts, right? And the way they were wired. And so I would give them the look and they would come over and they would inject themselves into the conversation. And 2 seconds later, I was gone. And so I don't know that I'm the best one to ask about this because I know that it's necessary. I know there are times where you have to do it. But at the end of the day, I think sometimes you just got to do hard things. And so I think that's true in communicating as well as anything in life. Sometimes you just have to sit down and go, I've got to have this conversation.
Yeah, and people fear those one-on-one moments because of that awkwardness that it can turn into. Because sometimes one-on-one conversations can be incredible, depending on who that person is. But you may get someone who, it's incredibly awkward.
You get absolutely nothing from it.
I tend to make people cry. That's the problem that I have. It's like all of a sudden they start crying. I'm like, wow, why are you crying? Don't cry. Please don't cry. What? Help? That's when I start looking.
Yeah, give that look.
And they know.
I think having this is something I was taught to do, is to get in a conversation, have an intro question. And have an exit strategy. For all small talk. So if I want to engage in small conversation, I have an intro question that I'm going to ask somebody, depending on the environment. And it usually has to do with their career. It's going to be, hey, now tell me, what do you do for a living again? That's going to be my intro question. And any networking thing I'm going to, I'm always leading with that question because people like to talk about what they do. And then my exit question, I'm not going to give my exit because then people know I'm trying to have a conversation, But I have an exit as well, so I think that helps with small talk.
And we may get into this in a second, and so I don't want to jump ahead. But that's not just true in small talk. That's true on stage as well.
So with what you just said, we're going to talk some details. When it comes to getting in front of an audience to give a speech, how do you prepare? What do your notes look like? Those kind of things.
Yeah, so content-wise, we may do this different. I'm a heavy preparer, but I spend most of my time in preparation. Most of what we do is sermons. So in my sermon content, most of what I'm going to be preaching on is stuff that I've either taught at some point or I learned at some point, and I know that content well. What I don't always know well is the areas of my transitions, how I'm going to start this thing, how I'm going to get out of this thing. That's where I spend most of my prep time is on those elements. Yeah, so
for me, I think there's been an evolution of communication. So when you ask what my notes look like, and so just to be fully transparent, everybody will probably turn the podcast off after I say this. So I actually went to college and took a course on communication that wasn't even an accredited course. It was a required course for the scholarship that I was receiving. And in that course, what was determined is that I should choose another profession. They basically sat me down in a meeting and said, hey, listen, so you really ought to think about doing something else. you're just not good at this. And what they were really saying is, hey, you're not good at the way we do it.
Yeah.
Right, you're not good at the system we have. It doesn't seem to fit you. And I had to learn that everybody's system is not my system.
Yeah.
Everybody's way of communicating is not my way of communicating. So I had to develop that. I had to figure out what that looked like for me. And so it started out. I remember my first message that I shared. I wrote out word for word, verbatim. Took me about 4 hours to write it. Took me about 15 minutes to read it. And then I had about 30 minutes left of time that I didn't know what to do with. And thankfully, I was 16 when that happened. And there were men around me who stepped up and filled that space with something else. And then from that, and you may remember this from the years of traveling with me, but I started preaching off sticky notes.
Yep.
So my whole topic of discussion, my whole message would be on a sticky note, one sticky note. And I could talk for 45 minutes.
Sometimes I'd look down at his Bible, and, because I watched him do this first, and then I tried to copy that style, and I'd look down and his notes, and when he says a sticky note, he didn't fill that thing up. It may have 4 words on it.
Might have 4 words. And I would go 45 minutes.
Yeah.
What I learned about myself in that process is that I'm not good at writing out everything word for word from start, right? Or maybe a better way to say it is I'm not a good outliner. So what I do is I create a story, and then I go back in the story and I pull out the important pieces, right? So now I just write. I literally, this morning I had 10 pages of notes. I literally wrote it out word for word. But then I go back and I pull out okay, these are the things that I really want to make sure to get communicated. And so I had to learn to develop that for myself. But what I would say to anybody who's communicating on any level is you need to have an opening. You need to have a middle, right?
Yeah.
But what most people don't work on is the close.
Yeah.
Most people don't. They spend so much time preparing the content in the middle and how they're going to open that they don't give time to how am I going to shut this down. And those people, you'll see them because they start circling the airport, and 45 minutes later, we're still circling and they don't know how to land this plane.
Yeah, they try to land it 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, they've got it in the air, but they don't know how to get it down, right?
Yeah.
Without ruining everything you feel like you just worked so hard to communicate. And so one of the things I tell, especially new communicators, is, hey, know how you're going to close. Probably know how you're going to close before you know how you're going to start. Because if you don't know how to shut this thing down, it's going to be ugly. And then I think the last thing is be you. Don't try and be who everyone else is. I did all of those things, right? Yeah. I tried to find out who I was by looking at other people who I thought were successful communicators and going, wow, if that works for them, then that's going to work for me. Just like Andy trying to use my sticky notes. I remember, and Andy's going to remember this as well, I remember as I was growing as a communicator, watching a good friend of mine that I went to college with who became an illusionist. And illusion opened the door for him to get on all of these platforms. He's speaking at all these major events. Yeah. And I thought, man, if I'm going to be a great communicator, I need to learn illusion. And so I began practicing illusion. And I'm just going to confess right now that it failed greatly on more than one occasion.
But he had some good moments too, which made me think as a young, I need to learn illusion as well.
Right, because if that worked. And
yeah.
And I think I learned one of my greatest lessons in communication through that process.
Yeah.
One year we did an illusion called metamorphosis. And metamorphosis is when you have this big box, and inside the box is a mail bag, and so I got handcuffed, placed in this bag. The bag was chained, placed in the box, and the box was locked. You might have been on stage, Andy. Mm-hmm. I can't remember. And then my assistant, who I worked with for a year, learning how to do this trick, would get on top of the box, raise a curtain, count 1, 2, 3, throw the curtain in the air. When the curtain came down, I'm standing on top of the box. I throw the curtain down, and he's in the box, in the bag, in the handcuffs. And this all happens in a matter of seconds. It was choreographed to music. Well, we never talked about what happens if the trick doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so I remember being at this camp and ending this message with this incredible illusion.
Yeah.
And I get in the box, I get in the handcuffs, I get in the bag, and 1, 2, 3, I didn't come out of the box. And my assistant, Jeremy, is standing on top of the box, not knowing, we never talk about what happens if this fails.
Yeah.
And I remember yelling from inside the box, somebody open the box. Like, it's locked. I can't get out. Somebody open the box. And finally, because the music's playing, it's loud.
Yeah.
They open the box, and I come out. And in that moment, I could have stepped into the failure of that, right? But I just came out and went, did you guys see it? How incredible. I got in the box, in the bag, in the handcuffs. You know, Jeremy threw it. We swapped places and swapped bag before. Y'all didn't see it? And the audience is looking at me like, what? And I said, do you want to see it again? And of course, they were all like, yeah, because I missed it apparently the first time. And the second time, it worked, right? It was the last time we ever did that again. But what I learned from that moment is that when you fail, oftentimes the only person that knows you're failing in that moment is you. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows the notes.
Yeah.
And I see people sometimes get up and they begin to communicate and something goes wrong. They lose their place, they lose track, they lose sight, and something goes wrong and they just freeze up and everything goes south. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody's reading your notes. Nobody has your script. Just keep going.
Yep. That's good.
So, y'all are both really great storytellers. What role does storytelling play in communication?
For me, it's pivotal. I think that's, Brandon mentioned about knowing yourself. And one of the things I knew about myself, I tried his style of communicating, speaking, Brandon's really funny.
Did you get a box? Did you ever get a box?
I never got a box.
Never got handcuffed in a box?
I watched Jeremy squat on top of that box when it didn't work, and I thought, I'm never doing this illusion. But I watched as he was real funny. He could take something and just the whole room would be just laughing about a story from the Bible or whatever it was that he was talking about, or whatever story he might have walked through. And I watched as humor worked really well for him. And I tried to be really funny and realized that's not my thing. But what I can do is I can tell stories. And in my stories, I can utilize humor when humor fits and let people laugh at the story, not laugh at me trying to deliver the story. Brandon can make a noise, and all of a sudden they start just cracking up laughing. So for me,
it depends on the noise.
Yeah.
And the age of the audience.
Right. Yeah. Senior citizen, and he's making a little, didn't work. But we were at kids' camps,
Yeah.
But for me, I learned real fast that storytelling was a big part. So that's how I usually open and close any sermon, any talk, any whatever I give. I start with a story and I end with a story because it's just by nature. I connect to stories, and I believe I can connect other people with story.
I think stories humanize what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It helps people see themselves in that place, in that position, dealing with that situation. And obviously, again, because most of what we do is in the church world, right? Probably the greatest storyteller of all time is Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, he just is so good at telling stories and really allowing those stories to bring that truth into a place where it's retainable and it's consumable.
Yep.
Right? People can see themselves in those scenarios and those situations, and it personalizes that for them. And they walk away a lot of times remembering that element. They may not remember all your points, but typically they remember your story.
Yeah.
So if your points are intertwined within your story, you've still accomplished the same thing.
That's so true. I tell my wife and I climb a lot of mountains, and so I tell a lot of mountain climbing stories, our failures, our successes, everything in between, and I connect them to whatever I'm talking about. And most time they'll remember that story. And then if I really dig on it and say, okay, what was the point of that story? They fumble their way around it because I merge the story into what I'm trying to say. If I only tell a story,
right,
and there's no point to the story, they remember a story, but they don't remember the point. Well, what's the point of telling the story?
Exactly.
So it's like storytelling is very helpful if the story is trying to drive home the point.
I took comm this past quarter,
Yeah.
and our one thing that they told us, my professor said that every single time that we give a speech, we should start it or at some point have a personal story to connect, with our audience, who we were speaking to.
Yeah.
That this is somehow intertwined, that personal connection into your speech or whatever you're trying to give.
Yeah. It makes a difference for sure.
And don't be afraid to steal somebody's story. Because sometimes you don't have a good one. I'm going to be honest. Sometimes I look at it and I'm like, man, I really don't have a good personal story here, but I know somebody,
Yeah.
and I don't tell them. I just make their story my story.
That becomes your story then.
That's right.
My final question is, how can we create a positive communication environment in our personal and professional lives?
Yeah, I think a single word that I think of here is transparency. You know, in my marriage, in my friendships, that like to be raw and real with the people who are close to me. If I want healthy relationship, that requires healthy communication, which requires honesty and transparency. So I think that, you know, in a single response to that'd be my initial thought to that.
I think, and I would agree 100% with that. And then beyond that, for me, it's consume healthy things, right? Because what you digest is what you eventually put out,
Yeah.
right? However that comes out.
Yeah.
And so I think just the importance of paying attention to what you're taking in, right? If you're taking in positive communication, affirming communication, if you're being intentional with that, then that's going to come out of you. If you're surrounding yourself with negative talk and negative ideas and fearful thoughts, all those kind of things,
Yeah.
then that's the stuff that you're going to put out as well. So I think if you want to create a positive atmosphere and a healthy atmosphere, then you need to consume healthy, positive things.
That's good. Yeah, I want to appreciate this conversation. I think it's helpful for our people to understand communication in general, but realizing it goes really beyond. If you want to be a better communicator, it's not about having the right formula.
Right.
It's about figuring out who you are and then just taking some action steps to grow in it. Hopefully this has been some helpful just conversation for our audience. What we'd like to do right now, Brandon, is at the end of each of one of our podcasts, we like to do we call our rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Where you shoot some questions your way. So I'm going to ask Mackenzie to start off with our first question of our rapid fire.
Yes, I would love to. And these are going to be quick 30, 45-second questions. And my first question will be, what do you love about this current season of life you're in?
Time. I have a lot of time. There's a lot of things to not like about the season of life I'm in, but if I'm looking for the good and the bad, I have time with my family and time with my son. And so for me, that's the most important thing.
Man, that's good. For you, when it comes to, you've been out in this doing ministry and communicating and all that, everything you're doing for 30 years now. And what would you say is probably one of the best pieces of advice somebody gave to you that maybe you'd like to share with our audience, that maybe to pass that advice along?
So I remember there was this moment where I was really battling between two different opportunities, and I had gone to a pastor mentor of mine and shared, hey, I just don't know what to do. And he looked at me and said, is there any reason you can't do both? And I said, no. He said, then do both. And so I think for me, like, that was freeing and encouraging that, hey, I don't have to be one thing. I can be multiple things. And that has helped me, I think, to develop into the person I am today.
Oh,
I love that. Who do you feel like invested in you the most over the past few years?
So I've been very fortunate to have a lot of people invest in me. And I can go way, way, way back. But God has always put men of faith into my life, rather in spiritual ways or in business ways. Denny Duran, and I can go all the way back to Warren Jackson, who gave me a platform when nobody else wanted to hear me speak, right? Even to this day, there are men like Paul Floyd and just so many men. It would really, I think we would be here for another hour, just me sharing with you all of the men who have spoken in my life. And then probably the biggest influence in my life, honestly, was my wife. She helped me to become the husband, the father, the teacher, the leader that I am today. And so if I were to give credit to one person, she put up with me the longest.
Yeah. Stuck with you
Yes,
through it all.
Through it all.
Man, she was great at putting up with you.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. What about for you as far as, we're a leadership and kind of business podcast here. What book or books would you say do you feel have been beneficial to you, or you feel like would be beneficial to our audience? What are your thoughts there?
So everybody's going to turn it off at this point, but
Okay.
I know that leaders are readers. I don't read a lot of books.
Okay.
It's not that I'm against books. It's not that I never read books. It's not that I'm illiterate. I read people.
Okay.
And what has influenced me the most is sitting down with people and saying, tell me your story. Finding the person who's done more than I have or has excelled in the area I want to excel, and then sitting down with that individual and saying, tell me your story from beginning to today. How did you get to where you are? So it's not that I don't like to read, but I would much rather sit down with someone and glean that personal knowledge and information. I just feel like a lot of times I watch people kind of trend on the next thing, the next book. I mean,
Yeah.
we're tipping point in this month, and we're this month, and I just don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
So I love reading. Hey, read. Everybody should read. Great readers. Andy's an author. Please read his books.
At least mine. If you don't read anything.
That's right. If you don't read anything, I'll give you one book that I read that's not even on leadership, but it really was impactful in my life, and it was called The Richest Man in Babylon.
That's good.
And that book, I've probably handed more copies of that book out to people, especially young people, someone Mackenzie's age. I wish I'd have had that book at a very early age in life.
Yeah, it's a good one.
That's good. What do you feel like is next for you?
You know what? I don't know. I know I'm supposed to come on here and have that answer, but I don't. Obviously, because of the season that I'm walking out of, I've taken about a year off, and so I don't have a 5-year or 10-year plan. The truth is, if I didn't do anything else tomorrow, I would be okay. And because of that, I am patiently pursuing what that next thing is. I'm not in a hurry to jump. I believe that there are going to be more opportunities to speak and communicate. I believe that there's more investments to be made, but I'm not grinding for those things. I'm not hustling those things. I'm patiently pursuing those things.
Yeah. Having come through a challenging season, it's good to just, I mean, you've been at this for 30 years
Sure.
of just grinding it.
Yeah.
So now, after going through a tough season, to breathe a little bit,
Yeah.
I think is actually a healthy thing to do.
And I'm very fortunate I know, maybe you're listening and you've gone through something similar to what I've gone through. Most people don't have the opportunity I had, which was to take a year and heal.
Yeah.
And that year that I had was because of the investments that I had made,
Yeah.
because of the things that I had done over those 30 years that set me up into a place where when this came in my life, I could step back and take a breath and not feel rushed into something else. I think about the people who have walked through a difficult season in life and had to go back to work, had to go back to day-to-day activities and living, and how difficult that must be. And man, I applaud them and just am amazed and inspired by them.
Yeah. Love it, man. I appreciate just some insight from you today, a little conversation, discussion, a little sneak peek into your story even, but also just around this topic that has been 30 years in the making for you. And I got to share, and part of that was fun and helped me in my early days. And so, man, I'm glad you came on today, and we got to see it made for a great episode for us today.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it. Had a great time. Love you and love everything that you've done. And I'm thankful for the 20 years that we've had of a relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, this was a wonderful episode. Thank y'all for both sharing y'all's insights. And thank you to our sponsor today, B Lane Printed Apparel.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Brandon's going to stick around here for a few minutes with us and have a little bonus discussion here for our Patreon members, for our Inner Circle. So if you're not part of our Patreon Inner Circle, I encourage you to join that, $7 a month, patreon.com/The Uncommon Success Podcast, and you can get weekly VIP discussions that we have with our guests, as well as some exclusive content, guests that are going to be on for the next month, things like that you don't want to miss out on. So patreon.com/The Uncommon Success Podcast.
You can also follow us on all of our platforms on Apple and Spotify, YouTube. You can also join us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Like, share, subscribe, review, and please leave us comments.
Yeah, and thanks again to our special guest today, Brandon Mitchell. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
And Mackenzie, thank you for stepping up and helping us out
Great
again one
job,
more time.
Mackenzie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Brinly, who?
Yeah, if Brinly don't watch out, man.
I'm coming for her.
Yeah, I mean, here we are now. We got episode 10 coming up next. In fact, next week we'll be talking about building a strong personal brand, and Brinly is supposed to be back. Who really knows at this point? But the word is Brinly's going to be coming back.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for another great episode, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, great. We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us on the Uncommon Success Podcast, where your commitment to growth fuels our passion to create more content. Special thanks to our executive producer, Jess Camp, and our technical director, Stephen Posey. We're excited about our episode next week and hope you would tune in to join us as we work together to continue our journey towards success. See you next time. Have a great week.